Welcome to another episode of Cohesia Connect, Connecting Conversations. I'm Carla, your host and co-host of Cohesia Connect, and I wanted to absolutely put a smashing introduction to our guest today, Nicola Morrison. Welcome to Connecting Conversations. It's so good to be with you. How are you today?
Really well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. We are big fans of great stories, as you kind of know about a little bit about me and a bit about what it is we do here at Keisha Connect, particularly about including the stories of many voices. And you have taken a super brave step. You've worked in, broadcasting for a really big part of your career, but you took a little bit of an interesting segue and became an author in the last year. And I love that. I mean, that is not normally a jump that you come across in a often. And it'll be great to hear just a little bit about you, what you do, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, so as you rightly put, I am currently an editor. Previously a correspondent for the BBC for 12 years, and in the pandemic, I was bored broadcasting from home. I was like, okay, so I was doing random bits of broadcast and radio from home for work, but I was like, why don't I just start writing something? People have always said, oh, you should share your story. Because every time I share little snippets, people are like, oh my goodness, tell me more. So I thought, why don't I just write something? But I didn't have the intention of becoming an author or publishing it or anything. It was just a pastime. Um, and the way God would have it would be that I ended up finishing it and getting it published and sharing it with the world. Wasn't part of the deal. But has been a really, really amazing and powerful journey, and just a good way to like document all that I've been through in terms of career and growth and identity and all those amazing things. So it's actually transformed me as a person as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so incredible. And I think that's really what I wanted to speak about today is what that process was like for you. And I love how you've mentioned already, great setup for the conversation, is realizing the things that happen to you in personal transformation as a result of deciding to take on a project and not really realizing what you'd signed yourself up for. And I'd really love us to kind of speak about kind of those things that became real and highlighted or emerged for you in that process. And one of the things I think is really awesome is let's start where you said, like, what are the things that you think became really prominent in that transformation process, particularly for you, that stood out?
Think the biggest thing would be growth. We don't take stock. We're hustling all the time. We're thinking about the next move, and yeah, that was great what I did then, but what's next?
Yeah.
And we don't actually take time to actually pause, be grateful, but also just pat ourselves on the back and say, "Well done, you've made it here. You're in a place that you used to pray about, and now it's your reality." So before you get, you know, carried away with the next thing, take
Mm,
stock.
mm.
So the book really caused me to actually pause and reflect. And with reflection, as I said, there comes kind of a knowledge of accomplishment. Yeah, there's more I want to achieve, but actually look how far I've come and how much I've grown as a person. So that was something that was definitely evident to me in the process. Yeah.
I love that. And in that process of like taking stock, I think we don't realize how much value comes out of that space and also how much learning or even self-awareness. I do remember COVID being super defining for a lot of people. So it's great to hear that for you out of this came this incredible body of work, but also how much it impacted you, let alone how much it's now impacting so many others that are coming across your incredible story. But there was definitely a moment of like, I have got four walls that has now become my office and now become my life. I could only exercise, 1 or 2 hours a day. And then it was like, whether you like it or not, you are going to take this opportunity to reflect on so many things. And one of the things I think that seriously came to the forefront for a lot of people's narrative in that time, and certainly for me too, was actually assessing a lot of relationships and how those had impacted my life. And that was professional, that was personal, even things that had kind of like historically impacted me and I never really dealt with. But now there is nowhere for you to run, no like ridiculously busy job to hide behind and kind of shelve that process of reflection to kind of sit in it, really understand, and then decide what to do next. Did you have a similar kind of feeling even in the writing of your book?
Yeah, I definitely had a time of one, understanding the meaning of relationships to me, and like you say, in the pandemic, I think it just magnified our lifelines. So like, who's your support system? Who do you talk to raise your morale? Who do you talk to encourage you in your faith? Who do you talk to that's a cheerleader for your ambition in your career? So all of a sudden, you're very aware, with all the noise stripped away and all the busyness taken out of the equation. I'm very now aware of who my lifelines are and what we do for each other. And I think with that came a responsibility to others as well.
Yeah.
So like, you can't just not be available, because I know you're at home and I know you're just ignoring my call at this point. Like, there's that part of
Nowhere to hide.
why am I going to voicemail? I don't understand. But so I think you started to be much more aware that we aren't these autonomous, go get it, I can do it all on my own, independent people, which I think I definitely subscribe to in certain areas of my life, where I was very sure that what I was doing was what I was taking care of. I became very aware of how many people were taking care of me and had been sustaining me, and they became very much more valuable and important to me. But then I also think I tapped into the relationship with myself. I
Yeah.
think we're so fast paced and there's so much I want to do and I'd like to do and I find fulfillment in. And all of a sudden I had time, and it was like, well, Nick, if you like writing, if you like sketching, if you like painting, if you like, whatever it is, if you like composing, or I mean, my keyboard sits in my room for months on end and I don't get around to pulling it out. In the pandemic, it was on a stand and it was out for 2 years. So I suddenly was aware of all the things that were quality of life for me. That Bible study that I'd been meant to get round to do, like, what's your excuse now? So it was quite
Mm.
confronting, but I also was able to kind of identify what quality of life meant to me, and my relationship with myself as well as others.
That's huge. And I think not a lot of people would actually feel comfortable going into their vulnerability of like, this is actually how you feel about you. You make promises to yourself, and look, you're now in a position to actually engage with some of the stuff that you said, yeah, I make my promises to do this for me, and we don't do it. And then it's actually having to like, but why don't I?
Yeah,
What has been those blockages? And I think a lot of people would say that is a scary space to go and visit, because do we want to scratch that surface a bit more? It's easier just to get on and hustle, like you say. But if we go back there, it's tough. But I would say, like, and from listening to the impact of what your book has done for you, it's so worth it, right?
yeah, I definitely think that the pandemic happened for a reason. And whilst there was such devastation, and probably your listeners and yourself have had great losses around the pandemic, but there's also been a pausing, and
Yeah.
and that was kind of like needed. I don't know if it was just me, but I felt like the world was spinning too fast. And so it also made me question my values. So, like, okay, you don't need to do your hair today. You don't need to dress up. You don't need to buy anything new. Now what? Do you still like yourself? Do you still,
Wow.
do you still want to,
Yeah.
do you still feel like a good person? You haven't accomplished anything in 2 weeks because you haven't been out doing. How do you feel
Mm.
about your value? How do you feel about your worth? So it really made me kind of confront my value system and get it in check, get it in line. Um, and so now I hate having to wear jeans and makeup, because I've actually kind of like loved that time of like the freeingness of not.
Mm.
But I actually had to have a little journey and a little word to myself, I think, in that period of time as well, which I'm sure many others did. But for me, it was needed. It was definitely needed. Yeah.
Love that so much. And I love that we started with that really important relationship with yourself that went through
Mm,
that period. But in your book, you also talk about a lot of the relationships that have been super impactful to you. If you were to take an aerial view of your life, and we'll go into more details about your book shortly, but if you were to take an aerial view of your life, would you be able to identify maybe some of the relationships that really had super significant impact for you, whether it's for better, for worse, or just for pure growth? And could you highlight some of those for us now,
yeah.
maybe?
So I think it's a given that your relationship with your parents, and I document that quite heavily in the book, is going to have a serious impact on you, positive or negative, because it's your first understanding of how love works. It's your first understanding of how communication works. So those kinds of things can be quite life altering, depending on how positive they are or how negative they are in terms of your experience. So I think for me, my relationship with my parents, which I describe as complex, but at the same time, I think it was a space where I learned about humor and family and interaction. And despite all that I've experienced in my home life, I've never felt such a belonging than when I'm around my family. When I'm around my family and they're, they look like me, they feel like me, they sound like me. My sister answers the phone and people can't tell the difference. For me, and this could be different for everyone, there's people that will be, raised by people that aren't biologically connected to them, or don't have siblings. But for me, family has always been kind of like a stabilizing thing. So when it's not been stable, my life's been chaotic. But when it has, I'm kind of able to face other hard things in life because I have that structure. And then there's been so many people along my journey that have just, for whatever reason, just given me grace, seen something in me. From my first favorite primary school teacher, who just indulged me in the biggest way because I was just such a big ball of energy. And so she would give me, senior duties in the classroom and be in charge of people. And my mum would always say to her, "Stop indulging her." But she just knew that I needed an outlet. And she just absolutely loved teaching, and I loved her. She was such an amazing teacher. And I think that's probably why so much of my love is rooted in academia and education and learning. And then in my career, I had so many cheerleaders along the way that, for whatever reason, again, just saw something in me and felt they were going to take a chance. And a lot of the time that meant putting themselves out of there and not going with the status quo and kind of breaking the rules to give me an opportunity. So yeah, relationships have been so important along my entire journey, as you say, for better and for worse.
Mm. I love that you speak about it. Both things within the family can bring great things, but also some really strong, not so great things. And you share quite candidly about this in the book. And we've actually been speaking with another guest not so long ago about that dynamic and relationship with our parents, and how I think the generation that they had and how they interacted with their parents was so different to the way that in our generation we have all these tools to emotional intelligence and how you can give grace for your parents, where that conversation was never really open space to discuss, like, actually my parent is a human and they're going through their own thing, this is impacting the way that they're parenting me. And now we can sit and have a very open discussion about it. That is like relatively so new. I can't imagine that that's a conversation that my mum could ever really have with her mum, or that my grandmother would have ever had with her parents. It's just not how things were done. How would you find, like, navigating both, you speak about the stability that your family was, and also it's been quite a place of quite sad conflict and real hard times, but your book has given you an opportunity to articulate it, and yet it's also brought, from what you shared in our conversations prior to this, more healing to everybody. Can you share a little bit about that process? I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much to unpack in terms of how you end up having the experience that you experience as a child. And for me, I had young parents. They were the teenage parents to my brother. They were 21 and 22 when they had me. I think back to when I was 22 and I was sofa surfing and I'd just taken, the biggest gamble of my life and kind of leaving uni and having nothing to show for it. I can't imagine having two kids on top of that. There
Mm.
was conflict in my parents' relationship because of their background, one of faith, one not of faith, one of structure, one not of structure. So they were trying to navigate that, raising two children, extremely hard times in terms of like resources, finances, all of that. And then that's before you even get into like their childhood traumas and what they've been through and what they've carried. So I think when you get to the point of like looking back, I think to myself, did they understand mental health issues? Did they understand their mental health challenges if they had them, or could they have recognized them if they did? Were they taught how to communicate and articulate their feelings? And how can then I expect that they would have had the tools to help me with all the complications that I had, not just at home, but at school, being bullied and being othered, having feelings of abandonment and grief from losing both of my granddads at the age of 11. It was so much. I think they were going through, especially then both losing their dads, the patriarchs of the family, and very, very big, bold characters, and then both of them going through that. I think you just get lost up in it all, don't you? You kind of, not forgotten, but there's so much there that there's just no time, there's no resources. So it has been really cathartic and healing to revisit my story. But I have to, I don't want to make it sound too pristine, in the sense that I think everyone's still on a different healing journey. Some people are not ready to confront the rawness of my story. Some are have felt guilty about it because they didn't know or see or recognize. And then I think some are just in a place where they've kind of made peace with it. They know my journey. We've talked through it. So this isn't news to them. So I think there's stages of that healing process. And I think everyone's just at a different place. And as the author, I have to say, this is my story and it is my right. But at the same time, I have to understand that everyone will be at a different place in their journey, and that's okay.
And that's a really brave and bold move. The title of your book, I know we haven't mentioned it, is Victory is My Name, which is super powerful. And I love that you've actually alluded to the fact, like, yes, this is out now. And at this season where this book comes out, there's like one wave and one level of, even though it's your story was never an isolated moment. It involved these very complex relationships and dynamics, whether it was work or whether it was with family. And then in another year, when everybody goes to a next stage of personal growth, which you hope we're all going through, we don't want to
Yeah,
stay the same. I hope I'm different from
definitely.
6 months ago. And then encountering actually a new level of understanding of where they were then and how this now relates to what's happening now. And it's not a process that's linear. It's not a process that I think, is gonna be straightforward. Did you realize that is what you'd signed up for in the writing of this book, is my question. And how does that make you feel? Like, it's out there now. I can't really take it back. But yeah, does any of that kind of thought process come to you, and how do you feel about moving forward with it?
I mean, I've been through every emotion along that process. So from finishing it to signing the publishing deal to it coming out, it's been a journey in terms of me wanting to protect people, but wanting to be authentic, wanting to have a book that is real, but not woe is me, having a book
Yeah.
that is victorious, but not so pristine that it sounds perfect. Actually, there's flaws and there's brokenness and there's hurt and there's pain. Um, and then also not having a book where I am this central character and everyone's sympathetic to me, but everyone else in my story is a villain. So again, there was so much responsibility there. I tried to show my sassiness and my outspokenness. This wasn't just, I wasn't a shrinking wallflower and I just kind of, everything happened to me. There were situations that I leaned into that maybe if I'd kept my mouth quiet wouldn't have been so hard. So I wanted people to understand the layers of me, and to be frustrated with me and sometimes sympathize and sometimes want to tell me off and other times want to hug me, and really to get the reality of who I am as Nicola Morrison, whilst doing everyone else justice. And I think for me, I described it as being the tree and everyone in my life being the branches, and telling the story as authentic to that trunk of the tree as I can, and where I have to, talking about those branches, but not going into other people's stories to the point where I'm speaking for them,
Yeah.
because their story is part of a whole nother tree. So that's kind of how I thought about it. But, the night before, I remember messaging my family going, is it too late? Before it hits the shelves, and they were all like, LOL, no, too late, love. um, which was,
You're in this for the long haul.
you wanted this, you put us in this. So there was that part. But I think from the time I decided that I knew it was going to be published, I always talk about the fact that I was just writing it as a project, and I feel like God said, no, this is going to the world. And for 2 months I stopped writing because I was just like, that's not what we agreed on, Lord. And then when I came to terms with the fact, there were many times when I would pause and be like, now I know people are reading this or going to
Yeah.
read this. I feel differently. So I definitely went through a whole array of emotions. And I think I've arrived at, if it helps someone, if it changes their perspective, if it encourages them, it's been worth it.
And you're in good company. I think a lot of what our values are here at Cohesia Connect is like, there is a need to amplify real life stories of people.
Mm,
You've done it through your written word. We do it through these conversations.
mm,
And the purpose behind that is highlighting the value of people's experiences. So we never get into a stage or a space where we take for granted people fall into categories or numbers or sections of society. It doesn't really impact me because it's happening on another side of town. The idea is that this is very much part of our human condition, and the more and more we are so aware of it and we've taken time to intentionally engage and connect, it makes our life, I think, more enriched. It makes us better humans and how we navigate, our professional lives, how we're navigating workspaces and creating opportunities for other people. It's not as selfish, actually. And this, I think, leads in quite well into, I think, probably my next kind of train of thought and questioning with you is, you mentioned that you were someone who was oftentimes the one person that came from an ethnic background in spaces that, like, you never really saw that many faces like your own. What was that like for you? And also, what was that like navigating relationships, knowing like, okay, there may be nobody else here that I might be able to identify with, but they didn't stop you from bridging some really important kind of connections. I'd love to hear something about kind of that process of what you've been through.
yeah, I think divinely, it was intended that I would always be not in spaces where I saw myself. And I think I say that because if you think from the age of 6, my mum moved me from a mixed primary school where we didn't even wear uniform. It was extremely open and free. And she moved me to a very affluent area where there was uniforms. At the age of 6, it was all very structured, and it was a different environment. And so from the age of 6 to 40, I have constantly been in spaces where no one looked like me. And that in the beginning of like, that's not fun. Like, I don't want to in any way say like that's the aspiration, that's the goal. I think, but what it did do is every single time I walked into a room and I was the only person in the room, I noticed it less and less. And that's not because it's good, but it did less to me internally. I became more comfortable being the only one like me in the room. But that took years, because on top of that, and top of being in spaces where people didn't look like me, comes with people not necessarily understanding you, people not necessarily seeing you. And then on top of that comes the layer that I experienced, which was the colorism part, where then you have people that do look like you and other people in the room go, oh, you too. And then you've got to go, well, actually, no, this person is discriminating against me on a colorism line. And that then trying to understand what that is. So it's almost like fractions within fractions. So there were definitely so many times when I did feel like I wish there was someone that got me. I wish there was someone that knew that calling my hair Medusa was not nice and not acceptable, or teasing me about the size of my lips was actually a racial slur. And so I wish there was times when, people that were using microaggressions were identified as such, but because it was only me calling it out, they weren't.
Yeah.
There was a lot of times, but I think the sweet spot of that is that I can very rarely be put in a space now where I'm unhinged, because I'm so used to not being the status quo that it doesn't faze me. And I've seen it dismantle other people's realities and their confidence, because it's now something that they're experiencing that they've never experienced. So I recognize, actually wasn't nice, would have much preferred to have not experienced it. The benefit of such is that actually I can walk into a room and I don't count the black faces in the room anymore. And even if there are black faces, they don't justify why I'm there. Whether there are or there aren't, I deserve to be in this space. And there's a confidence there that comes from constantly being confronted by something and overcoming it. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of my
Yeah, really helpful.
experience.
No,
Yeah.
thank you. Really helpful. And I think it's really important for us to take a really good look at that, because I think within the certainly the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, what you commonly is that there's just not enough representation, and for some people that becomes debilitating or paralyzing from actually moving forward. What you're saying, and I think this is a really valuable narrative to bring to the table of this conversation, is like, regardless, really good things could come from that. Because the other flip side of what I think I've also come across in just watching, because these things come in a bit like trends and waves, don't they? some of the issues that I find is like, well, if there's not enough diversity, like we should just have diversity faces to make it look good on the outside. But really, that doesn't really help necessarily a business or an overall organization if you don't have the right people there for the right skills. And where I'm all about, we're about inclusive spaces and about making sure that there is diverse talent available and have the right accessibility. That's definitely one level. But what we want is people to get to confidence like, I'm here because I'm good. I'm here because I bring good quality work to the table. And I think we're in a tension space about that. To listen to your story, I think that should, I'm hoping that will be encouraging to many, because I think I relate a lot to what you said. Most of the time in the areas that I grew up in, usually the one person of color. What made it difficult is that my sister looks like my mother, who's blonde and blonde hair, green eyes, and fair skin. They thought we were friends.
Right.
So she was having very different experiences in the same school than I was. Like they tried to do racial slurs, but it was a joke because she looked small, petite, and blonde like everybody else. I literally was the
Right.
strange peeing in the room, and realizing that the treatment towards her would be different until we came as a package deal together. And then people are like, oh, that's so different. But for me, all I've known is because my family's so different and diverse, I expect diverse environments all the time. I expect I might be the only person of culinary, but that doesn't determine or define my sense, like you said, the inside of my value that I can bring somewhere. And what I'm trying to say is like all of these things can be true, but they don't always have to be stumbling blocks or stopping points that now prevent us from moving forward into really great spaces that benefit not just us, but others later on, to hear what you have to say or to what they receive from the enrichment that you bring to any kind of space.
Mhm.
And I love hearing what you said there. In your experience, and you mentioned that you were in broadcasting before, and I know that's still on a journey about having representation. Did you ever feel that that was a tug for you when you were in the on the ladder trying to climb to these really great spaces in your career?
Yeah, I mean, the media is such a difficult industry because it's not like a science where you can just study and have the qualifications, or something mathematical where you, again, study, get the qualifications, and the trajectory of your career is very, very linear. Media is very much about who you know. It's very much about being the right place, the right time, the right look. It's so much that's not actually about what you bring. So,
Mm,
it's a really hard place where there's no blueprint that you're navigating, and you're navigating it as a person, like for me, a person of color, a woman. I was particularly young to be in the newsroom. And so it's unprecedented in terms of the things that you're coming up against. So I'm sure my counterparts never had comments about their natural hair. Don't
yeah.
ask me why, but just as before my broadcast career started off, I decided I was going to chop off all my relaxed hair, which was about down to here, and my hair was about this short and was all curly. And I was just trying to embrace it and learn and love the new me, and was being constantly confronted with other people not feeling like that was a look that was acceptable or that was kind of what they wanted. Um, so there's that whole layer before you even get to my credentials, my qualifications, my experience. But it's a tricky one because I can also say that I've also benefited from there not being those conventional rules. So there's been so many jobs that have been created and tweaked and bent, and
Yeah.
to help me get along, which you kind of go, thank you, you did me a solid there. But so then equally, I think you get into this space where it's like you have to just get on with it, make your opportunities. But most importantly, I sought out my cheerleaders, and I tried to not get bogged down by those that didn't support me or didn't see a vision when it came to my career and my future aspirations. But yeah, it's definitely not an easy industry to navigate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really respect you share that so openly, because for those that come across this conversation, be aware that there's going to be challenge. What that looks like for you might have something to do within the ballpark of what we're talking about today, but also not. But be willing to figure it out, go down the process of it, and lean into what growth will come through it. We've spoken a lot about just all these very different ways in which relationships have kind of defined what Nicola has become, and you speak about it in your incredible book. From all of the lessons that you feel that you kind of learned through the process and your the time that you've had to reflect on the relationships that have really set certain trajectories, that have really defined so many different parts of you. How do you navigate your relationships now? Do you bring anything like, oh, I've learned I will not do this again? And now do you feel like you've changed in how you approach the new relationships? Because I don't know about you, but I find that certainly like forging new relationships in your late 30s or 40s now, like I am, it's a very different approach than I used to have in my 20s. And if it feels a bit more complex, and I'm really eager to hear other opinions of other people. Like, what does that look like for you over there? Because I know it's looking a kind of way for me. And how, now that we've heard and learned so much about your incredible story, how has this impacted your way of navigating relationships now?
I think you're right. As a woman, also at the age of 40, I think relationships get more complicated and harder as you get older because not only are we carrying baggage with us, or history from failed relationships and lessons learned that make us operate and think in different
Yeah.
ways and trust at different times. I also think, just as the age defines, it's harder to make friends. It's harder to be like, would you be my friend? I really like you. It's just, if you think in the playground, you ran up to someone, do you want to be my friend? No. Okay, I'll opt you
Yeah.
tomorrow. You run off and you're over it. But as you get older, there is scars, and there's wounds, and if you've had a failed friendship, it's kind of once bitten, twice shy. Oh, I really kind of went out on a limb with that person, or I revealed so much to them and they betrayed it, or they threw it in my face, or they discarded my feelings, or so you become a little bit more wounded and a little bit more scarred as you go through the channel of life. So I think relationships do become more complicated, but I do think that there's more meetings of the mind. So I don't know if you experience this, Carla, but definitely for me, I definitely have this broader spectrum of kind of like, we work together, we kind of get each other, we vibe, we have similar interests. We're not like best friends, but we're not work colleagues anymore. I have a lot of people like in that space, whereas before it was like there was work,
Interesting.
there was church, there was
Yeah.
friends,
Yeah.
and now there's a little bit more fluidity, and I
Yeah.
think that's just because we're finding more shared interests, and we're kind of converging in more spaces, and I quite like that. So I might meet someone that's of color and has worked in media, but they're not Christian, and then I'll meet someone that's Christian but not of color, and there's all these different kind of
Yeah.
crossovers, and that mean that you
Yeah.
connect on some level. And I think as you get older, you're more willing to give those relationships some life and kind of invest.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I know when I was in my 20s and people were like, do you want to stay behind after work for drinks? I was like, got my own friends. I'm out of here. Whereas now I'm kind of like, not after work, but I'm kind of like, hey, we can chat on WhatsApp, or we can, I'm more open,
Yeah.
like nurturing
That's
those.
so interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think like I love how you said like we have come through, some hard lessons learned with previous friendships come and gone. And then there's also like that sense of reticence, like I'm putting a lot on the line here. I've just come too far in life. Things have got different stakes now. I'm not figuring myself out anymore. And also I think I've become where, like you said, there's more room perhaps for graciousness. For me, I think there's also less room for like, I'm not willing to maybe just fly by some kind of surface only
Right,
relationships now,
right.
because I don't know how much time we have. And I don't know if that's to do with our age or also because of what we've been through, like with COVID. Am I, are the other people in my life, as you said, cheerleading you on, genuinely there to build? They don't need to be like me. They don't need to like even be on the same journey as me. But in terms of like your values, in terms of I want to be there for that person, like we started to realize like, why am I hanging on to people that if they're not contributing in that kind of way, then actually that you find that you're losing pieces of yourself that I don't know how much I can afford to make that kind of loss anymore. So I think what you say is so interesting, and the openness and like, okay, maybe let's see, like we can have grace for that, or we can be open to stuff like that. And I think you and a lot of people are kind of navigating like, okay, how do we do friendships first? And it's so funny because definitely someone asked me a couple of months ago, I know this is really weird and we're not like 10 in the playground, but do you want to be friends rather than just chatting on WhatsApp? Like literally it was an invitation to friendship, and I'm like, why are we not getting used to doing that? It's
Yeah.
like we have to start from scratch, but in a very
Hmm.
different way. people are laying down their cards and say like, look, I'm kind of looking for someone who's gonna, be there. Are
Yeah,
you okay
it's
with
kind
that?
of like the
I
dating pool, isn't it? It's like, I
honestly,
don't spend my time here.
you absolutely did.
Like, we've been talking on WhatsApp for ages. Are we going to have a date? Are we like, what are we doing?
Honestly, exactly. What are we doing here? And like, it's and because people want to build, they want to
Yeah,
build things, and we
yeah,
recognize with time, like, and we've spoken a lot about today in this episode is about how relationships define that, and we've realized how much that has been the currency to get us from one step to another. Whether it's our family, and they like either set us up in a way that we feel like, that really took a lot from me. Didn't give me the best start, but I learned so much, and now it's actually helped me to propel forward. We've seen what that relationship has done for us. We've seen how relationships, in the professional world are like, there's some real allies out there, some real cheerleaders. Hold on to them and make sure that you're that person too, because it's tough
yeah,
to climb the ladder. And we knew
yeah,
we couldn't get there without those people. We've
yeah,
become so much more, I think, fluent at articulating that and being aware of that. And now we're like, okay, if that's what it really means about relationships, why are we not spending more time talking about it and educating ourselves on what this is going to be like? Because that's going to be the determining factors of so many areas of our life. And then invariably what we become like as individual people. Nicola, this has been just amazing to talk to you. Everyone needs to follow Nicola on all the platforms. Read the book. I have done that. I feel like I want to go back and reread certain bits, because I feel like, as much as this has been your story, you have been a mouthpiece that resonates, I think, for lots of people who don't haven't maybe always had the words to articulate what it's like to feel certain things about navigating tough times with family, work, being the only person in the room sometimes. And you've really done that. You've done everybody a solid. So thank you.
Took one for the team.
You know what? And it takes bravery to do that. And I really commend that so much. And I hope that that encourages other people. Like, there's so much value in your own story. And however that you decide to kind of use that, whether it's in your workplace or you're someone who's a mentor for one other person, do not devalue actually what it is that your story is going to bring to any environment. Nicola, it's been awesome. Thank you so much. Any final words that you would say to anybody about kind of like using the power of their story?
I think what I would say is, uh, if there is an opportunity to share your story happened for a reason. And the amount of times I've shared my story and seen how much it's impacted others, even if it's snippets, there's a reason you went through it. And connection amongst people, community, and coming alongside people and saying, I see you, is sometimes done through a shared experience. So I think if you've been through something and you're in a position where you can speak life into somebody else, you can affirm somebody else, you can encourage them from a first-hand experience. I know for me that would have been so powerful. Do it, lean into it, and do it, because it will pay dividends in terms of the impact that it can have. Um, and it just takes bravery, but ultimately it's so worth it. It's so worth being a part of change. So do it is my advice.
I love that. That is perfect advice and such a great way to end this conversation. Nicola, thank you so much. We'll include all your socials and connections to where people can connect with your work with this podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Carla. It's been great.